We shift gears with the next film for a talk on avian migration and the importance of creating a bird sanctuary with Professor Reuven Yosef. Professor Yosef has created a bird sanctuary in Israel. Professor Reuven is the recipient of the Vasundhara Sanman 2021. Without further ado, let's watch the talk by Professor Yosef.
My talk is about ecology and physiology of avian migrants, but I will concentrate mostly on the subject of the necessity of building a bird sanctuary exactly in Eilat, which is where I live in Israel, and the importance of that very point on the migratory flyway between Eurasia and Africa. The subject that I would like to stress most is the importance of gas stations or petrol stations, as we call them in India, for the stopover ecology of migratory birds. And this is what I researched in situ in Eilat. One has to understand that migration is something that is across all species, not only of birds, but it exists in mammals, in reptiles, in invertebrates, such that all species that cannot escape extreme environments have the choice of either going into hibernation or estivation or moving out of that area and then coming back to breed. So this seasonal movement, which is temporal, is what we call migration. And the idea is essentially to exploit the very high resources which are available at the end of each of the migrations. And the cue for the migrations is essentially the shortening of the day length. So when the day length shortens in the northern latitudes, the birds get the cue that the onset of winter, which means lack of resources like food, and that they have to migrate south below the snow line and or into other continents, which will bring them into areas which will be much more hospitable and to move into areas where they will be able to survive. However, one must remember that the wintering grounds are not the breeding grounds. That in order that when the birds move south, they're moving to sustain themselves through the winter, to try and survive it, to come back the next spring to breed on the breeding grounds in the north, such that it is very, very important to remember. And as you can see on the map in front of you now, the tundra regions in winter are extremely inhospitable. Everything is covered by snow. Food is very difficult, if not impossible, to access. And hence, the result is that all these populations either go into hibernation because they cannot fly out like bears, or they migrate to areas further south, whether it is towards South America and the Americas, whether it is to Africa from Eurasia, or towards the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia in from the Asian countries. In the summer, or more precisely in the spring, when we have when the thaw sets in and most of the snow recedes towards the North Pole, most of these areas, which we call the tundra, become free for these birds to come back and to breed. But what's most important is the very, very high abundance of prey species which allow them to breed in these areas. So breeding on the tundra, where there are no trees, is essentially breeding on the ground and fostering your young and getting them ready. But then this has to be extremely precise because the window of time which is available to these migratory birds is very limited, because these birds need to arrive at the breeding grounds at the correct time. They cannot come too early because then the snow is still on the ground, the freeze is still there, and these birds will starve to death. In contrast, if they come too late and the young fledge too late in the season, these young will not be ready for the rigors of migration. which they will have to face when they have to migrate south. So it is a very precise time in the calendar of the year that these birds have to arrive on the breeding grounds, quickly lay their eggs, try and fledge their young as soon as possible so that the young can practice flying, collecting their own food to be able to migrate further south. And for all this, you need energy. And from here, I'm going to take a step back and say, okay, we are now on the migration. When these birds are migration, and I'm going to focus on the Eurasian flyway to Africa, because that is where my research station is situated. Looking at this satellite photograph of NASA, you can see that Alaf is located at the northernmost tip of the eastern arm of the Red Sea. In the middle, you can see the Sinai Peninsula with the Suez Canal to the west. And the eastern arm, right at the tip, is where is the city of Alaf. Now, what happens here is a very, very interesting situation. And I'd like to take you to a map of the BirdLife International, which is very geocentric in its depictions. But one has to realize that this shows the major flyways. Now, the thickness of the lines shows you the amount of birds that the relative amount of birds that fly through the area. However, I'm sorry to say that this is not very correct. And actually, the birds on the eastern flyway, the line on the eastern flyway should be almost double in thickness to the other three flyways. Because the three major flyways, which we have connecting Europe and Asia to Africa, are from the west, the movement from Gibraltar to Morocco, or in the middle, coming down Italy, Sicily, Tunisia, and then crossing the Sahara, or the circum-Mediterranean flyway, which comes from the east, is when the birds are coming down, and it doesn't matter from where in Europe or where in Asia they're coming, they essentially go through this narrow little land bridge, which is where Israel sits, and goes south. Now, the physiology here is very important. One has to realize that when birds are on migration, that they have developed over millions of years certain adaptations which are physiological. One of which is most astounding is their ability for atrophy of organs which will not be required on migration. For example, they have finished reproduction in the northern grounds. They will not need their gonads until they return to the breeding grounds. So these gonads, which can comprise as much as 20% of the body mass, are an extra baggage, a price that is very difficult to pay energetically if they have to carry it around for the next 8 months. So what the birds have evolutionarily developed is the ability to atrophy, to disassemble most of the uh, reproductive organs and to convert that into fat. Similarly, when they're ready for migration, we have an extremely, like all vertebrates, have a very convoluted and large digestive system. Most of that can also be catabolized and turned into fat. So this atrophy of organs allows the birds to maximize fuel storage in the form of fat and flight muscle. But because it is fat which gives the maximum number of energy, fat is the best possible fuel storage than proteins, which is the muscle. So those of us who have studied physiology realize that when you catabolize muscle, you get relatively little energy in return as compared to fat, where you get almost 30 times more energy for that same unit of energy to be received. So these birds are essentially flying while fasting because they do not have a digestive system with which they can digest any of the food or water that they will take in. Also, one must remember that when birds are metabolizing fat, they are essentially getting what we call metabolic water. So all the water requirements within the body are supplied by the mobilization of fat. So they don't need to drink on migration. And this is very important to remember. Also, when flying, there are three kinds of habitats which, if they can avoid them, they will do so. If not, if they have to fly over them, then they will do it at a stretch. These are high mountains, great expanses of water, and deserts. So we can clearly see how the mountains that stretch across Europe and Asia. So we are talking of the Pyrenees in the west, Alps in the middle, we have the Balkans, we have the Caucasian Mountains, we have the Himalayas. All these are essentially funneling the birds into specific flyways. Further down, we come to the big bodies of water, starting from the Mediterranean Sea in the west, the Black Caspian Aral, the Red Sea, which comes in, the Persian Gulf, and of course, further lakes to the east, which even further compact the flyways for these birds. And then we come to the desert. Now, we are talking of August, September, October. The rains south on at the equator and south of the equator, this is the rainy season. So the birds have to essentially cross this brown line at the top. That's all they have to do. Now, these birds, when they're ready for migration, and if it doesn't matter if it is a small willow warbler or it is a pelican, they have a flight range of about 3,000 kilometers. 3,000 kilometers, after which they have to stop and refuel. So when they go south in the autumn and they leave the green areas of Europe and the Middle East, they only have to cross about 2,000 kilometers of the Sahara and they have reached safety. Because in the Sahil Zone, this yellow line south of the Sahara, it is the rainy season. So when it rains, it's green. And the birds can reach the safe areas and rest, regrow their digestive systems, start feeding, and they have reached their wintering grounds. However, in October, November, the rain stopped in the Sahel. And so all of this yellow zone that is south of the Sahara essentially adds to the Sahara to the north. And what you get is a much larger belt, much broader belt, pushing all the birds that have come on the Western flyway into Central and Eastern Africa. So all of the bird populations which have come down through Spain, come down through Italy, are now pushed to the east. And these spread down towards South Africa. But the seasons in Africa are opposite to ours. They are opposite in the southern hemisphere. So the spring is setting in Africa. The local bird species who have not gone anywhere start to breed. So Africa suddenly has to supply food to 5 times more mouths of their own, plus all the billions of birds which have come in from Europe and Africa. So the competition for food becomes immense. And the statistics show that essentially about 60% of the birds that migrate to Africa from Eurasia will become food for someone else. That only about 40% will survive the overwintering in Africa. And these 40% have to try and get back to the breeding grounds to put forth the next generation and to bring the population back to 100%. So when the day starts shortening in the southern hemisphere, and the day starts lengthening in the north, this is the cue for the birds to start migrating back to their breeding grounds. However, now they face a much bigger challenge because they are far to the south because of the Sahil zone. And when you calculate the Sahil zone plus the Sahara plus the Sinai, when they're coming up the Eastern Flyway, you get the 3,000 kilometers. And those 3,000 kilometers end exactly at Eilat. And that is why Eilat is the hinge. Eilat is the gas station where many of these species, tens, if not hundreds of these species, must stop, must refuel, and then continue the migration to the breeding grounds. But remember, when we say refuel, it means that they have to complete the 3,000-kilometer migration with an additional little energy left for about a week. Because after they reach Eilat, they have to have enough energy to rebuild the digestive tract. They have to be able to assimilate the food that they take in at this feeding point. If not, they cannot make it. And I'm sorry to say, hundreds and thousands become statistics that they have accomplished the migration, they have made it to Eilat, they are walking around here. But I'm sorry to say that they are walking dead simply because they have reached here with no energy left, and their inability to regrow the digestive system does not allow them to fatten themselves and to fly on. They become part of that 60% which will not finish the migration. So, as we can see here, this is a flock of white-winged black terns turning up usually around the 21st of April in Eilat. And we have very precise dates when these birds come in. And it's very, very important to remember that these birds are moving by the hundreds of thousands, and literally they create clouds in the skies, which are incredible to see. A paper published back in 1995 by Frunke et al. Showed the major differences between spring and autumn migration. So on the graph on the right, we can clearly see that most of the migration, and by the way, the density of the color shows the intensity of the migration. So what we can clearly see is that birds coming down from Europe through Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, into Israel, and then moving on into Egypt, are hugging the Mediterranean coastline, including those coming from the east from Asia. They're hugging the Mediterranean coastline and staying in northern to central Israel. Very few populations come through southern Israel, come through Eilat, which is at the bottom of the map, which is the southern tip of Israel on the Red Sea. However, the picture completely flips when we come to spring migration, which is the map on the left, where we can clearly see that most of the migration is concentrated at Eilat, because this is where the birds are reaching after the 3,000 kilometers. This is where they have to refuel. The migration to the north and the central areas is weak compared to what is happening in Eilat in the spring, that is now. This map is from 1995. Since then, with my students, I have done a lot of other research, and we can clearly say that the map, that the arrow pointing east from at Eilat should also have a branch going north, cutting north over the Gaza Strip and Ashkelon, cutting across the Mediterranean Sea to Cyprus and into southern Europe, which is the major flyway for all the European birds going back, and that are not afraid of making a sea crossing. All the rest simply go up the Rift Valley to the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, and then on into Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, and then branch out into Europe and I should say West Asia. So what was here in Eilat? Well, this is an aerial photograph from 1918. The Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany This is just when World War I started, sent a group of a squadron of planes to Oman. This whole area, especially Syria, Lebanon, were ruled by the French. These were French colonies, and there were German settlements in the Holy Land at the time, and hence the Kaiser sent uh, a squadron to photograph the Holy Land from the air. Luckily for us, one of these pilots decided to come further south, and he took a picture from the east to the west of the northern tip of the Red Sea. And what we can clearly see at the eastern edge of the Red Sea is the city of Aqaba. On the western side, there is only a police station. There's nothing else. But what has geographically happened here is a very interesting phenomenon. Most of the wind in this Syrian African Rift Valley is from the north to the south. However, once in a while, when there is a south wind, it's very strong. And in this part of the Red Sea, it is also very shallow. So what this force does is to pick up a lot of the detritus of the sand at the bottom and dumps it on the shoreline. So what we can clearly see is that all of the shoreline, the northern shore of the Red Sea, is about 3 meters higher than the area to the north of it, to the land to the north of it. And what has happened on the Israeli side, what is today the Israeli side, what has happened to the west, that is that the rainfall brings in flash floods. But because of this burn, because of this natural dam, all of these floods do not reach the sea. They're stopped before, and it became into a dry salt marsh. That dry salt marsh, turns out, is the key gas station for most of these refueling birds. It turns out that the extreme desert conditions over here have allowed only one major species of plant to breed in this, the Sueda monoica. Now, that plant, in order to escape the extremes of the desert, fruits and flowers twice a year, in the spring and autumn. And that's exactly when the birds are migrating. So they are either eating the pollen, or they're eating the fruits, or they're eating the flowers, or they're eating the young leaves. They're eating the insects attracted to all of that. And this is what this salt marsh has essentially become as an important refueling station. If we go ahead into 1945, a photograph taken by an RAF pilot, also from a very similar angle, shows us that this triangular salt marsh still exists in its entirety, it's still functional, and it's in 1949 that Israel captures this area. 1948, Israel got its independence, and 1949, Israel captures this area, and at the western end of the Red Sea, establishes the town of Eilat. And this is when things start to change. The international boundary, Jordan, is established along the break, the fault, which is what we call the Rift Valley, which comes out of the Red Sea and climbs onto the land and runs from south to north. So when we look at the next picture, which is from 1956, what we can see on the western side of the of the northern tip of the Red Sea is the beginning of the town of Eilat, the airport which is built on the western fringes of the salt marsh, the first of the salt pans which are built for extracting sea salt, and all of the human refuse is dumped at the rubbish tip, which is highlighted and written in. So this rubbish tip is how we start abusing that very important salt marsh. We start using the D word. For most people, we call it is developed. We as conservationists call it is destroyed. So this is where essentially, because this is a flat area, while the rest of it is very mountainous, um, people start using it for a large number of reasons. And the next picture, although at a different angle, all of the pictures were from south to north. This one is south to north, but north is at an angle. And what we can clearly see is that all of that salt marsh has vanished. That what we have instead of it is the airport to the west, all of the hotel complex for tourism, including lagoons. The salt factory has expanded immensely. Whatever is left has become agriculture. And what the garbage tip to the north, to in the northernmost corner, is what is left. So in 1993, I was requested to come and do something about that garbage tip. And the idea that I came up with was to rehabilitate that land, to recycle it into a bird sanctuary, and in an area that is 9% only, to try and give 100% answer to the bird population numbers. Now, it's not that people did not know about this. I mean, scientists knew about it, conservationists knew about it. And this is a paper that was published in 1968 in the journal IBIS by today Professor Uriel Safriel on bird migration at Alaf, Israel. And in his map, it is very clearly mentioned, and he writes in the words garbage heap. He already specifies that this is an important site. He specifies the importance of Eilat as an important refueling area, but no one pays heed, and the development goes on until the point where nothing is left except for the garbage dump. So what I did from 93 onwards was essentially to dig big holes and to bring in earth, because Eilat continues to build new neighborhoods, and a lot of this earth is being taken towards other garbage dumps. So I requested that all of this clean earth be dumped at my site so that I could landscape, I could contour the bird sanctuary as per my understanding of the requirements of the birds. After the contouring, after creating that area, we then planted only annuals or species which are desert species, locals, so that they fruit and flower soon, creating a seed bank, which would bring in more insects, which would bring in and allow greenery so that birds could come and feed not only on the insects, but also on the seeds and the flowers and the young leaves. So we essentially recreated this bird sanctuary, this whole area, which is, I reiterate, only 9% of the original area. And in this 9%, we are trying to give an example of how we can serve 100% of the birds. And of course, when these birds come in, we can do bird ringing, misnetting, do research, deal in conservation at the continental levels, environmental education, which is very important, ecotourism, and essentially, in this picture, you can see Eilat in the background to the south, and the bird sanctuary with Lake Anita in the forefront, and the plants which are growing. There are flocks of white storks that you can see on the banks. And this is how this serene area has come to be created on top of a garbage dump. Now, for the first few years, I must say I had a lot of opposition because people did not realize what I was trying to achieve. And, you know, when people are narrow-minded, the results can be horrific. And I won't go into that, but I can say that it was a real challenge trying to keep this piece of land and to turn it into a bird sanctuary. It was not an easy fight, but the results, um, they came fast and furious. And in this slide, you can see some of the awards that we received for this project for helping global populations of birds on migration. It started with in 1999 with the Swarovski Optics recognizing me as the Environmental Man of the Year. In 2000, we received the Rolex Award for Enterprise and also the Condé Nast Award for Tourism. The National Aviary in Pittsburgh, the United States, recognized us. WWF gave us a lot of support and recognition. NASA supported a lot of this reclamation work. Earthwatch Institute sent us a lot of volunteers, paying volunteers to do a lot of the hard work with us, such that a lot of international organizations essentially recognized our work and not only gave us the recognition, but also supported us financially or with handwork. Um, for me, one of the best points was in 2003, when the governor of the neighboring town of Aqaba, um, in 2002, the peace treaty was signed with Jordan, or it was slightly a few years earlier, but the governor of Aqaba, His Excellency Biltaji, Akil Biltaji, requested my help because in the peace treaty with Jordan, one of the points that was brought up is that a sewage treatment facility would be built on the Aqaba side of the border. Now, if we look at the map at the bottom, the red line shows the present Elat Bird Sanctuary on the Israeli side to the west. The yellow line is the international boundary between Israel and Jordan. And he has all of these sewage tanks, which he did not know what to do with. So he requested my help, and we signed our own peace treaty between Aqaba and Elat. And here you can see us with the agreement in our hands. Um, and the two mustache people are His Excellency Biltaji and myself, and holding the signed contract wherein we, myself, help him create a bird sanctuary on the Jordanian part of the border. And that is demarcated by the light blue line. And it also includes the sewage ponds, which continue to be hold water in order to attract birds. And in the top picture, you can see myself with the staff of the Aqaba Bird Observatory. After it was built and ready, they did it, I must say, within a year. And it was a wonderful achievement. And it was wonderful just to have, less than a kilometer away, two bird sanctuaries servicing all of these bird sanctuaries, all of these bird populations. Within Israel, in 2008, 6 years to the independence of Israel, the president of Israel, Mr. Shimon Peres, here in the picture with me. At the bottom picture, we're having lunch together. I was awarded the Israel Missionary Award, which is also given by the Israel for a beautiful Israel. And so this award was given to me and it is a recognition somewhere along the lines of Bharat Ratna. The city of Eilat recognized my contribution to Eilat in environmental education, in conservation, in ecotourism, and gave me the award of the Outstanding Citizen of the Year in 2009. And then in 2020, I was also awarded the Environmental Education Award for the city of Alaf.